Welcome to Leading Today, the podcast where we explore leadership not as a title, but as a daily choice. I'm Dr. Lisa Bagby, and in every episode, we dive into the moments that shape leaders, teams, and organizations. Today, I'm going to share something a little bit different with you. I'm going to share a story, but it isn't about a $1 billion company. It isn't about a CEO making headlines. It's about something much quieter, something that happens every single day in conference rooms, Zoom meetings, hospital huddles, classrooms, and offices all around the world. It's about voice, a voice that almost disappeared. So let's begin. I will change names in this story to protect individuals. But here we go. Every day on a Tuesday or every week at 9 a.m., there was a product development team that gathered around the same conference table. The routine really never changed. There was always coffee cups, laptops, a few side conversations. The same people speaking first and the same people speaking the longest. And almost every week, Emily would leave wondering why she even bothered coming. Emily wasn't shy and she wasn't unprepared. She wasn't inexperienced. And in fact, she had some of the strongest analytical skills on the team, actually. She would spend hours preparing before every meeting. She anticipated questions. She researched customer feedback. She developed solutions before anyone else even recognized there was a problem. But almost every time she began speaking, someone interrupted. Actually, or I think what you're trying to say is, or even dismissively saying, well, let's move on. Perhaps the most painful interruption of all, someone would simply start talking louder. Sometimes people didn't even realize they had cut her off. And other times they knew and no one said anything. Not her teammates, not the manager, not the senior director who sat quietly at the end of the table. The meeting would simply continue. And it was as though Emily had never opened her mouth. At first, Emily kept trying. She raised her hand. She spoke earlier. She even tried to prepare more thoroughly. Maybe, in fact, she thought that if my ideas are stronger, people will finally listen. But something strange happens when people repeatedly feel unheard. They don't immediately stop caring. They stop believing that it matters. And eventually, well, Emily, she stopped volunteering. When someone asked if anyone had ideas, she just looked down at her notebook. When brainstorming sessions happened, she waited, not because she had nothing to contribute, but because experience had taught her what would happen next. Someone else would speak over her, someone else would receive credit, someone else would decide what mattered. But here's the part that fascinates me. No one on that team would have described themselves as disrespectful. In fact, they would probably say they valued collaboration. They believed they were being inclusive. They considered themselves a great team, even. And yet, their behavior told a different story. Sometimes culture isn't created by what we intend, it's created by what we repeatedly allow. Think about that for a moment. Leadership isn't just what you encourage, it's also what you permit. So, anyway, a few months later, everything changed. The team's manager retired, and in came Jordan, a new leader, not louder, not more charismatic, not even the kind of leader who walked in determined to reinvent everything. Jordan just did something much simpler. He watched. For the first few meetings, he said very little. He observed who spoke, he observed who interrupted, who received acknowledgement, who never finished a sentence, and he saw how patterns began to emerge. And one pattern became really impossible for Jordan to ignore. Every single time Emily started speaking, someone else took the floor. Then came the quarterly strategy meeting. Now, this conversation centered around declining customer satisfaction scores, and ideas bounced around the room, but nothing stuck. And finally, Emily quietly began. I've been looking through the customer comments and I noticed, but before she could finish, another teammate leaned forward. Well, I think the real issue is. And that's when Jordan calmly raised his hand, not dramatically, not angrily, simply with intention. He smiled and said, "Hold on." Then he turned toward Emily. "Emily, I noticed you were speaking. I'd really like to hear you complete your thought." Silence filled the room. For just a moment, everyone became aware of something they'd never noticed before. They had interrupted her. Again. Emily hesitated. She wasn't used to having the floor returned to her, so Jordan waited. No rush, no pressure, just space. She took a breath. "Thank you." Then she explained a trend she'd uncovered after reviewing nearly 1,000 customer comments. Customers weren't unhappy with the product. They were frustrated by one confusing step in the onboarding process. And Emily proposed a simple change: a short instructional video, a revised email sequence, and one adjustment to the user interface. The room became quiet. Thinking quiet, though. And one by one, heads began nodding. Someone finally said, "Well, why haven't we thought about that before?" Jordan, well, he smiled. He says, "Well, I think Emily just did." Within 6 weeks, customer complaints dropped significantly, the onboarding process improved, and support calls decreased. The leadership praised the team's innovation, but Jordan knew something far more important had happened. The team hadn't just solved a business problem, they had uncovered a cultural one. The following week, Jordan started the meeting differently. Before discussing business, he addressed the team and he said, "I want to share something I've noticed." He wasn't accusatory, he wasn't embarrassed for anyone, and he simply described the pattern. He says, we interrupt each other far more often than we realize, but one person experiences it more than anyone." He paused. "When people aren't able to finish their thoughts, we don't just lose their words, we lose their confidence, and eventually we lose their ideas." No one defended themselves, no one argued, because they now had seen it. Several teammates looked toward Emily. One quietly apologized. Another admitted, "I honestly didn't realize I was doing it." Someone else added, "I thought I was just excited." Jordan nodded. "I believe you, but good intentions don't erase impact." That sentence stayed with the team for a long time. Over the next several months, the meetings changed. People paused. They became comfortable with silence. They waited. When someone accidentally interrupted another person, it wasn't awkward anymore. Someone would simply say, "I think Sarah was finishing a thought." Or, "Let's go back to Michael's idea." The interruption stopped becoming personal. It became procedural. The culture shifted, not because people became perfect, but because they became aware. Months later, Emily met with Jordan during a routine one-on-one. She smiled and she said, I almost started looking for another job. Jordan, he looked surprised. He's like, What? And she said, Well, I had stopped believing that my ideas mattered. Then she added something he would never forget. You didn't just hear my idea, you reminded me that I still had a voice. Now, let me ask you something. How many Emilys are sitting in meetings today? How many people have stopped contributing, not because they lack talent, but because they've learned that speaking doesn't change anything? And perhaps the harder question, have you ever been the person doing the interrupting? Not intentionally, not maliciously, just habitually. Because here's what I've learned after years of coaching leaders: the loudest voice isn't always the wisest voice. The quickest answer isn't always the best answer. And the person speaking the least, they may be carrying the insight your team has been searching for all along. Leadership isn't measured by how much you say, it's measured by how well others are able to contribute because you're in the room. Creating psychological safety is not complicated. Sometimes it begins with one sentence that says, Let's go back. Or, I don't think they were finished. Or maybe even, I'd like to hear the rest of your thought. Those simple words communicate something powerful. It says, Your voice matters here. And when people believe that, everything changes. Innovation increases, trust grows, engagement rises. People stop surviving meetings and they start shaping them. Thank you for spending these moments with me today on Leading Today. If today's story made you think about your own meetings, your own leadership, or perhaps someone whose voice has gone unheard, I encourage you to take one action this week. Notice who hasn't spoken. Protect the next unfinished sentence. You may discover that the idea capable of changing your team has simply been waiting for someone willing to listen. If this episode resonated with you, please subscribe, leave a review or a comment, and above all, share it with another leader, and especially share it with one who believes that great leadership begins with great listening. Until next time, remember, leadership isn't about having the loudest voice in the room. It's about making sure every voice has the opportunity to be heard. I'm Dr. Lisa Bagby, and this has been Leading Today. Take care, lead with intention, and I'll see you next time.